Hello and welcome to Love from the Other Side. If you are on this video, perhaps you too are in need of hope. We bring you stories from around the world of people who have shared their near-death experiences. While you may not agree with everything they share, we ask that all comments be kept respectful and kind. With that being said, let's get started with today's video. I was a physical therapist employed at Alaska Hospital and Medical Center in Anchorage, Alaska, and had suffered a ruptured disc in my lower back. For a number of weeks, I was treated conservatively with therapy and injections without improvement. Once the decision was reached that surgery was needed and it was scheduled, I began reaching out to members of my church, as well as family and friends back in New York State, asking for their prayers. The morning of my surgery, I remember the nurse who was prepping me for surgery commenting that I was the most relaxed person she had seen, getting ready to go into surgery. My husband, Bruce, and two small children, Krista, age 9, and Brian, age 6, were in my hospital room with me when they brought the stretcher to take me to surgery. They walked with me for a while, and then they were given directions for the waiting room that they should go to while I was in surgery. So they kissed me and left. Once in the operating room, I remember moving over to the OR table and having the IV in my arm, through which then they administered my anesthesia. The next thing I was aware of, I found myself very near the ceiling in the corner of a room, so high that I was within inches of the ceiling tiles. I became aware of the doctor swearing angrily and ordering nurses to get more bags of blood. I looked back toward the sound and I saw my body being flipped from face down to face up on the table. There was quite a commotion of people rushing out and back in, and I remember how pale my face looked. I knew it was my body I was looking at, but I felt no alarm or concern. I remember moving effortlessly through the wall of the room and down the hallway out through the double doors of the operating suite. I couldn't feel any resistance or sense of touch when passing through the walls or doors at all. As I drifted down the hallway, I noticed an elevator door opening, and a man that I didn't know came rushing past the open elevator door. Something about how he was rushing and his obvious high anxiety drew my attention, so I watched him, noticing that he was wearing a brownish jacket of some kind and that he seemed to be carrying a bag of some sort. He was hurrying towards the doors to the operating suite and slowed near a man by the entry to the operating suite. I don't recall the words of each of them, but I knew the man who had come past the elevator was a surgeon, and he was irritated at having to take time to slow down, while the other man didn't think that this man in street clothes had any right to enter the OR suite. I didn't hear the sound of their voices, but I was telepathically aware of each man's thoughts, unlike in the OR where I heard the sound of the doctor swearing. Once the surgeon passed into the operating suite, I no longer watched him. At this point, I began rising through the ceiling of each floor in the hospital as though I was being pulled by some force outside of my own body until I passed through the roof itself and found myself in the sky above the hospital. Once outside the hospital, I began to move much more quickly past the mountain range near the hospital and over the city of Anchorage itself at the height of an airplane. It was at this point that I realized that if I was moving so quickly, I should feel wind rushing past me and I should notice a difference in the temperature of air. But I felt none of this. I remember rushing into a dark, cave-like area where I continued at a high speed for some time before I became aware of a small, bright light in the distance in the direction that I was headed. I quickly emerged into this intense light and looked down at the rocky ground below me, where my feet should be, and a rugged rocky incline to my left. As I looked up the incline, I saw the back of a man proceeding up the incline and telepathically knew that I was to follow him. I examined his back and noticed long, dark hair tied back with a leather tie, a short toga-like garment in rough off-white material, and sandals on his feet with leather ties wrapping up around his calves. I remember thinking, that's not Jesus. We reached a ledge which opened into a gorgeous pastoral scene of vivid green grass, studded with vibrant colors, flowers unlike anything I have ever seen. There were enormous shade trees scattered around, and beyond the field was a small river about 30 feet across. We came to the bank of the river, and on the opposite bank, gathered in a big group, were all my loved ones who had passed away. I saw my father and my brother first. They were as thrilled to see me as I was to see them. Then I noticed various aunts, uncles, and cousins in the group. Finally, I realized that a few people that I didn't immediately recognize were my grandparents who had died before I was born, so I had never met them. Still, I knew who they were and could telepathically hear them saying how much they loved me. I don't remember what any of them were wearing or even what they looked like, but it was definitely their spirits, and there was no doubt in my mind who they all were. Before I could go to them and embrace them, my guide, who had led me up the incline, communicated to me telepathically that I had to go somewhere else first and that I must follow him. So again, I followed him around a bend in the river until I could see in the distance a beautiful Greek-style building that was vibrantly white with many steps leading up to it and huge columns in the front. Lots of spiritual beings being dressed in vibrant white robes were milling around outside, going in and coming out. My guide took me inside, where it opened into an enormous library full of tables and lined with books. Many spirits were studying different books, and my guide communicated that this hall held the book of life described in the Bible. We continued to a back room where some spiritual beings were sitting in chairs that encircled around a screen in the floor that was like a glass-bottomed boat. They communicated that I was to watch my life, and then the scenes like a 3D hologram appeared. I was able to re-experience myself in all these events in my life, but just as importantly, I was able to experience the impact of my actions and words on other people with whom I had interacted. Not one of the spirits condemned me for those painful things I had done or not done, but I felt so very sorry and sad about them within my own heart. It all seemed to happen very quickly, but had a tremendous impact on me. I got the impression that these spirit beings had been with me and had helped me plan my life before I was born. They let me know that I would be able to return to my life if I chose to do so. And then they showed me through the same screen some future events in my life if I chose to return to it. Some that would definitely occur and some that were possible but not definite. At this point, there is a gap in my memory of what took place, and the next thing I was aware of was being shown by my guide, the back doctor who had operated on me, standing in the waiting room in all his green surgical garb except his mask, and talking to my husband while the kids sat behind my husband on a couch. I wasn't able to hear any words said, only saw the scene. And then I was shown the image of all the prayers being said by my family and friends, each one appearing like a musical note and linking one to another, reaching up towards where I was. Lastly, I saw my daughter's prayer forming the last link to reach us. Suddenly, all the emotional ties to my husband and children rushed back into me, and I remembered being a little girl myself, when at the age of 7 I had prayed so urgently that my father wouldn't die, but it seemed that my prayer wasn't answered and my father died. I knew I couldn't let my children grow up without their mother, as I had grown up without my father. Hard as it was to leave this place of overwhelming, unconditional love and indescribable peace, I knew I had to return to life. I was told that the future of things in my life that I had been shown would be removed from my memory, as well as some other things I had been shown during my experience, because the choices I would make in my future life would be tainted and not truly legitimate choices if I were allowed to retain those memories, but that I would be granted enough memories to convince my logical mind of the reality of my experience, and I would be given an unmistakable sign that would be proof of where I truly had been. With that, the next awareness I had was waking in the recovery room with my husband and children standing around me. Everything that I have written here was fully in my mind and heart immediately as I was greeted by my loved ones, and my sign was there too. My sign was not an object. It was the fact that I was completely enveloped in the peace that passes all understanding and the amazing unconditional love of God, like an invisible bubble of protection. This amazing sensation, this sign, stayed with me at a tremendous intensity for about 3 weeks to come before gradually fading away. After it was gone, I knew more than I have ever known anything in my life that my experience was completely real, and that the gift of God's love and peace that was with me for all those weeks was the perfect proof and confirmation to my heart that I truly had been in the spiritual realm with God, because it was exactly how I had felt during the entire experience. I know the absolute truth of it to this day. At first, I didn't tell my family about my experience. I remember how surprised I was the first time that the surgeon who had saved my life came to my bedside for a visit. His name was Dr. Gower, and we had never met before at that time, but he was the same man I had seen rushing into the operating suite. He had been called to operate on me. Unlike the surgeon who had done my back surgery, who barely came in my room, and even then wouldn't look me in the eye, this surgeon was warm and kind. He clearly cared about me and was pleased that I was recovering well. About a week after I was home, I had to go to Dr. Gower's office to have the staples removed. My incision ran from my breastbone to my pubic bone, and it had been stapled together. Not long after I was home, but before the visit to Dr. Gower, I had to share with my husband about the near-death experience, and wondered out loud about the message I had been given about memories that would convince my logical mind of the truth of my experience. I remembered that my experience had included seeing Dr. Gower arriving the day of the surgery, and that if he could confirm what I had seen when he arrived that day, then it would indeed convince my logical mind of the validity of the experience. Although I already knew it was real because of my sign, I also wanted my husband to have no doubt about it either. So, after Dr. Gower had completed my examination and expressed how pleased he was with my healing so far, I said that I wanted to ask him something about the day of my surgery. I told him that during my surgery on my back, after my artery had been cut and I was bleeding out, that my spirit had left my body and traveled out of the operating room. I told him that I had seen him arriving that day, although I hadn't known who he was or why he was coming there at the time. I told him about how he was rushing towards the operating room and was wearing street clothes, a brown jacket of some kind, and a carrying bag. I saw his being annoyed to be slowed down near the doors of the operating room suite, when he was clearly anxious to get into the operating suite. Then I asked him if what I saw was actually what happened that day. His response was, "How did you know that?" I had been at my office when I was paged to come to the OR stat, and that I was needed to do an emergency surgery to locate and stop the bleeding from a vessel that had been cut during a back surgery. I can't remember for certain, but I think he may have asked me what else I had seen and experienced. I believe that I shared a bit about seeing my deceased loved ones and a little bit about my experience, but I don't remember any of the details I told him. Dr. Gower never clearly said that he was actually wearing what I described. He only said, "How did you know that?" He was clearly blown away, though, and I think he would have said he wasn't wearing that or that he didn't remember it happening that way, if in fact it hadn't happened the way I had described. I came away convinced that he had confirmed to me of what I had seen. Just the fact that he had come to the hospital in street clothes rather than having been a surgeon on call already at the hospital in scrubs was an unusual circumstance, and he did confirm that much. It was enough to convince my logical mind and my husband's as well. Well, friends, that is our experience for today. Thank you for joining us again. I am going to put a link in the description area of this video where you can read more details on her experience. I apologize that my voice is cracking a little bit today. I am still recovering from a respiratory illness, but I thank you for bearing with me, and I hope that this video brought you insight and hope as to what waits for us when we cross over to the other side. Until next time, God bless.